Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this very important webinar. My name is Bee Vong Duchen, and I am the Editor-in-Chief of Means and Ways. I'm very pleased to be bringing you this conversation today. At Means and Ways, our goal is to ignite constructive discussion on Canada's national economy and public policy anchored in the world where business intersects with politics. I'll be handing the conversation over to our panelists who will be breaking down the budget for you, but first let me introduce them. Unfortunately, Lucy is unable to attend today, and stepping in as moderator and to provide the political lens on the budget is Marci Surkes, Managing Director of Compass Rose. Excuse me. Marci is a 15-year veteran in politics, who has served in the most senior roles as an advisor and public policy leader, most recently as Executive Director of Policy and Cabinet Affairs in the Prime Minister's Office from 2019 to 2022. Marci led a team that provided strategic advice to the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, where she collaborated closely with officials to implement the government's mandate. And prior to serving in the Prime Minister's Office, Marci spent 4 years as a Chief of Staff to the Minister of Public Safety. Marci advises multinational corporations, Canadian businesses, and nonprofits across a range of economic and social issues, often targeted at the C-suite. And our second panelist is Kevin Page, founding president and CEO of the Institute of Fiscal Studies and Democracy. He is recognized as a national authority on Canada's budgetary system and its intersection with cabinet and parliament. For 27 years, Kevin was dedicated member of the Federal Public Service at 3 central agencies responsible for fiscal matters, including the Department of Finance, the Treasury Board Secretariat, and the Privy Council Office of Canada. Kevin was named Canada's first parliamentary budget officer in 2008, and he's previously held the Jean-Luc Pépin Research Chair at the University of Ottawa from 2013 to 2016. He taught public finance and economics and encouraged youth participation in public policy discourse. Currently, he teaches a public policy seminar course at the Max Bell School of Public Policy at McGill University in Montreal. And Jennifer Angel is the CEO of Evergreen, an organization that brings private, public, and community capacity, ingenuity, and investment together to build inclusive, sustainable public places that attract people and investment, support climate adaptation and mitigation, and contribute to well-being for all. Prior to Evergreen Canada, she was the president and CEO of Develop Nova Scotia, a provincial crown corporation where her team engaged cross-sectoral partners to develop and steward some of Nova Scotia's most visited public spaces and multiple award-winning projects, including the Halifax and Lunenburg waterfronts and Peggy's Cove. Jennifer was recognized in Atlantic Business Magazine's top 50 CEOs in Atlantic Canada in 2021 and among the most powerful women in Atlantic Canada in 2022. And she received the inaugural Ouija Weenan Allyship Award in 2022 from the Mi'kmaq Native Friendship Center and the Spirit of Halifax Award from Discover Halifax in 2021. And she was recently appointed by the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities to chair the Canadian Infrastructure Council in December 2024. So that was a long intro, I apologize, but welcome to you all and thank you for participating today. And I'd like to hand the microphone over to Marci now.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks, Bea, for the introduction. Thank you to Means and Ways for the invitation to appear this morning. I know the budget is the news of the week, although there is kind of a political swirl that may be overshadowing some of the content on the budget, but we're going to focus on the content first. And I am going to turn to Kevin Page, who, if you follow anything related to budgets and the dissection of Government of Canada finances, you will know Kevin. This is not his first rodeo doing this kind of budget breakdown. So, Kevin, I'm going to start with you. We know the budget. We know the deficit number is pretty eye-popping. It is a very large number. Canadians, I think, were prepared to accept that we were going to be in this position to some degree. But beyond the $78.3 billion number, what do you make of this budget? What are your early impressions?
Yes, I see the budget as a shift, a significant shift from previous budgets under Prime Minister Trudeau. Really a budget focused on growth, on wealth creation. If you contrast that with Prime Minister Trudeau, was very much a lot of his budgets were focused on social cohesion. I would argue redistribution. Creating, I think, long, programs I think that'll be with us for a long period of time with respect to childcare, the child benefit. dental care, pharmacare, and significant amounts of resources that went towards to help Indigenous people. And I think this budget is very much focused on growth, focused on particularly with respect to capital investment. It's even the frame of the budget is very different than past frames. Now we think of we're going to start thinking of operating versus capital. We're going to report differently on those. We'll have fiscal targets around those two, operating and capital, getting to something called an operating balance in 2028-29, running deficits for capital investment. So I think even just the targeting alone will really shift the focus towards investment. I think the government has tried to do that. Deficits and debt are elevated. I think maybe surprising for some Canadians, not so surprising when if you were, for those people that look at these international fiscal monitors and they see what is going on in other countries. But I think, these higher deficits, they do come at a cost. They, with respect to higher interest costs. And, I've lived through the 80s and 90s when we saw those interest costs rise dramatically and really squeeze the room to maneuver for governments. And but I think the context is we're in a crisis. That's I think a big question that people have to ask themselves. If we're in a crisis, what do we do? And the government has given us a growth strategy in terms of handle the crisis.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm going to turn to Jen. Jen, your first impressions of this budget. The government said it was attempting to, quote, meet the moment, that moment being, no surprise, the geopolitical uncertainty, the menacing threat of the United States. Did the Carney government meet this moment with the budget it delivered this week?
Yeah, so I think the numbers are big. Some would say too big. Many would say not big enough. I'm interested sort of less in the what and more in the how. And I think, as Kevin said, there's strong signals of the directionality of the budget, like how can it catalyze private investment? How can it unlock capacity outside of the public sector? So I'm really thinking a lot about how this budget turns into operational programs and whether the innovation that's needed within the public sector to actually unlock those other capacities is achievable. I think it is, but I think it requires a disruption. So not just things like risk tolerance and predictability of projects beyond political cycles, but also thinking about how we are focused on outcomes as we're deploying this capital, and indeed really pushing projects to achieve multiple public policy objectives or multiple outcomes at the same time.
Kevin, you talked about this being a budget that provides a roadmap for growth, and I think Canadians have understood for the last number of years we've been in a growth crisis. I mean, people have talked about crises of different sorts in the economy, a productivity crisis, a growth crisis. What in this roadmap, assuming that we take it as such, what in here in particular do you think best gets at the growth question?
Yeah, I think first it's the honesty that we do have a growth problem. I think I read this morning, or did read this morning, that the governor of the Bank of Canada didn't want to comment on the roadmap per se or the specific measures, but he said he thought they got the diagnostic right. So we have to deal with this sort of growth issue. I think just to put that in context for the listeners, like right now, putting aside the forecast. But right now, if you just look at the economy, we're growing less than 1% a year on a year-over-year basis. Effectively, we're in a recession in the goods sector, which includes, manufacturing, utilities, construction, mining, and agriculture. And we've been effectively in negative year-over-year basis for a number of months now. We've seen a slowdown even in the service sector. It's growing about 1% a year on a year-over-year basis. That's been cut in half, that growth rate over the past year. And now we see effectively we're dealing with this rupture of the Canada-U.S. relations, and this incredible trade uncertainty. We see significant impacts in key sectors of the economy. So I think just the acknowledgement that we have this is a significant problem and we have to deal with it. I think part of the hinge moment as well is that we've been kicking the can down the road on a number of files that are important to Canadians. When we look, we listen to pollsters, they tell us, Canadians are worried about healthcare. They're worried about job security, which is, related to, the economy. Many Canadians are still worried about, how is Canada positioning itself with respect to climate change. So we have it's just sort of this accumulation of issues. And so I think it's effectively to say that, we're at a hinge moment, an inflection point. I don't know if it feels like a moment to me because I think it's a series of moments. It's not like the Blue Jays are up, we're in the extra innings and we got to make a hit in order to, to win the World Series, because I think it's going to be a series of moments that are going to last. But I think, I think there's a recognition that, we need trade diversification, and we've seen our Prime Minister crisscross the map across the world, talking to world leaders, looking at opportunities in Europe, in Asia. I think that's important. And I think a lot of, when we talk about this new infrastructure, a lot of it has this feeling of creating new trade corridors, new ports. I think there's a recognition as well that some of the key industries in the future where we have weaknesses in our supply chain, particularly around critical minerals, like we have to be investing in this capacity to close up those gaps in the supply chains. I think there's a recognition as well that like the world is changing with respect to technology, that there's these incredible advancements that I don't completely understand. But, with respect to AI and how that can impact productivity, with respect to biotechnology, quantum computing, and clean energy. So, like, I think there's a start. This is a budget. It's a start of, and of a pivot. And it's, I think we need it. So I think the recognition and just sort of pointing us in a different direction with respect to this a roadmap which needs to be developed is a significant step forward.
Thanks, Kevin. And I'm sure, like many other Blue Jays fans, we're hoping the Jays get another chance, a second chance at a hinge moment, so to speak, that it wasn't a one-off and that it's a series of World Series opportunities. But picking up on the infrastructure piece, which I know is Jen, this is your bailiwick. Let's talk about that. One of the major pillars in this budget, we understood going into the budget that critical infrastructure and some of the pieces that Kevin just spoke about, trade corridors, port modernization, big pieces of infrastructure were going to be central here. Machinery change to stand up the major projects office several months ago. We understand that it is very busy and that another tranche of projects to be announced very shortly. But in this budget too, it wasn't just the big projects. We also saw huge emphasis on domestic housing supply and other, let's call them sort of mid-sized, smaller community-based infrastructure projects, presumably to spur more regional opportunities for growth. Jen, what did you make of the infrastructure, the different dimensions of infrastructure here? And did the government get the balance right in terms of the investments required?
Yeah, thank you. I'm certainly focused a lot on housing and housing enabling infrastructure. So when we're talking about things like, roads and transit and water, those are sort of fundamental baseline infrastructure that you need to support housing. And I'd add that I think when we think about sort of some of these mega projects and this idea of nation building projects, that can be a big project, and it also ought to be thought of as a collection of small projects at a national scale. And I think housing is an example of that. I think we need to do, and this has been some early criticism of the budget, the climate imperative needs to be embedded in all of the infrastructure projects that we're undertaking. So it's not sort of a infrastructure or climate sort of budget choice, but how is each project, rooted in data and evidence, thinking about, not just resilience and adaptation, but indeed regeneration. And so as we're thinking about housing enabling infrastructure, housing development in particular, how are we using data and evidence to ensure that these large budget incentives are incentivizing development in the right places and ensuring that We're building density and we're building, adjacent to existing infrastructure, and only building new when there's a requirement, an absolute requirement to do that, recognizing that every bit of new, public infrastructure is a liability for maintenance and repair. And certainly we're hearing from municipalities across the country that they have anemic budgets to meet even just the repairs and maintenance obligations of the infrastructure. So I'll maybe share one last sort of example. In our work at Evergreen, we're focused on public spaces. We think they're housing enabling infrastructure, but they're also a great example of sort of a small intervention that can solve for multiple public policy objectives at the same time across health and climate. And also local economy. And I think we need to be bringing that multi-solving lens to all of the infrastructure decisions we're making, whether we're talking about things like housing or indeed, things like defense infrastructure. And there's great examples in the past coming out of DARPA, for example, in the U.S. investment in infrastructure, spurred innovation that's become, it's in our devices, and it's driven sort of the development of the internet. So thinking about the outcomes and really challenging every dollar that we're spending on infrastructure to get at multiple outcomes at the same time, and using that as an opportunity to challenge the private sector and indeed community impact sectors to bring ingenuity to the problems. I think that's where we can start to do something really interesting and really make this a sort of a pivotal moment in Canada's history and future.
Lots of jokes that Mark Carney's favorite word is catalyze. It appears in the budget, I don't know, dozens of times if you control F the whole document. Kevin, the government wants to catalyze $500 billion in new private investment over 5 years. The team over at RBC Economics said if realized, that kind of investment could increase GDP by 3.5% by 2030, which would improve the fiscal balance by $7 billion per year and would provide a lot more room to maneuver. Kevin, what are your thoughts on that? Is that doable? Are we going to see the kind of private investment the government is banking on from this budget?
Well, that would be the $1 billion question. That I think. I think one of the challenges of the budget is you paint a picture of context for change, a hinge moment, and you kind of cast it in a dark light. We're in a crisis. We got to shift, and then you try to inspire people, build confidence that enormous amount. We have enormous potential, and we need to seize this potential. You try to create excitement that we can do that. If there's an arithmetic around some of the numbers in a budget, I tend to be very mechanical and not very creative. But I think some of those numbers, $500 billion, $1 trillion, seem to me like communication numbers that were really trying to excite people about, the art of what is possible. We're a $3.2 trillion economy. If you look at, how much, private business capital formation we have now, it's probably in nominal terms in the $600 billion a year range. If you look at, the gross public investment on an annual basis in the national accounts, you add the federal, the provincial, the municipal, because actually the provincial and municipal have a bigger stock of public capital than the federal. We're probably in the $130 billion range. So just like for me, from a very arithmetic perspective, to get $500 billion, it would be amazing. It would be like at the beginning of the year, if this was May and the Blue Jays weren't 500, we'd be saying we're going to win the World Series. And most of us didn't think the Blue Jays would get to the World Series. And then when they got there, we thought we would lose the first 4 games to LA, and we found ourselves into overtime, in the 7th game. So I think to me, like those numbers are very aspirational, and I think it's part of that pivot. Like you've got, create the context for change, like focus on growth, get this investment, and with that investment, like it comes enormous opportunity, like opportunities for young people to kind of to go to the skilled trades, or young people to get excited about the sciences, young people to get excited about building a new set of housing stock that Jen talked about. So I see it more in that light, but I think it does raise the question is how are we going to hold people to accountable? And what is that accountability framework? And I really like the way Jen put it in the context. Like, how are we going to look at, how are we going to challenge every dollar so that we get the most out of these investments in new assets or existing assets?
Absolutely. And Jen, let's come back just on some of what you were talking about earlier, the impact of this kind of investment of infrastructure on cities and communities, the opportunities. And, we know anecdotally or even, like very, very pointedly, there has been critique that in Canada, we just can't get big things done. We're just unable to get the big projects built. We're unable to meet the housing supply demand. Is anything changing in your view? Is this actually the hinge moment where some of those critiques can be laid to rest and we actually are able to build?
Yeah, I mean, I think necessity is the mother of all invention. And I think fundamentally we need to get, and this will sound naive, but we need to get some of the politics out of projects in a couple of ways. So I think in my experience, anyway, my direct experience, in government, we often, as a well-intentioned way of risk, way of managing risk, we are overly prescriptive about what the project needs to look like, and then we go to market and find the lowest bidder and what have you. There's some very good stuff happening in outcomes-based procurement. So we're instead of sort of saying, here's the perfectly designed thing, tell us what it will cost. It's like here's the outcome we're trying to achieve, and we have for example, this additional imperative of resilience, climate resilience that we want to embed. How might you solve it? What are the solutions that exist, and what will it cost? And then you're also driving sort of competition, using competition as a tool to drive better outcomes. I'm also always puzzled and maybe amused by projects and project budgets being announced when they're at the very early stages of design. So we say we're going to deliver it on this timeline at this amount of money, and there's we're at 30% design or something. Like we need to set expectations better. We need to do a better job of setting expectations around project delivery, so we're not a failure out of the gate, announcing things at a time that we really have no business committing to anything. And most of all, I think maybe project capital, especially these massive sort of mega projects, but almost any kind of capital project, they're multi-year exercises. They're almost always going off the rails, not because of technical complexity. Like there's lots of good sort of solvers of technical problems in the country. It tends to be people. It's humans, and trust breaks down, or the government changes or changes direction. And so getting to this point of trust and true partnership in projects that in a way that offers some predictability, which I think is a fundamental for this ambition of unlocking private capital. Like there needs to be some measure of stability in the project environment for it to be investable. And I think that's within government's control to do. But it will require a shift in how we approach projects through procurement and also governance, and being able to attach longer time horizons and related predictability to the projects at the outset.
I'm actually going to stay with you for a minute, Jen, because a number of things you just said I want to unpack, but you've got so many good threads going. I actually wanted to just let folks know, I know we have actually quite a few viewers with us this morning, and they seem eager to get in on the conversation. So if you do have a question for the panel, please don't be shy. Go ahead now, think about your question, pop it in to the chat, and we will come to it momentarily. So Jen, I've given you 30 seconds here to breathe and collect your thoughts, but I want to come back to some of those final threads around, in particular, major projects where there are Indigenous communities or nations involved. And the government of Canada, as we know, passed Marci legislation in the spring, Bill C5, to be able to move quicker on big projects. Consultation with Indigenous leaders happened, excuse me, only after the fact this summer. Certainly, the government received some critique of the timing and sequencing of that. But moving forward, how can the government, and governments at different orders of government, but in particular, how can the federal government move forward with these relationships that we know the Crown has the duty to consult on? How might they best move forward from where we are right now in order to achieve shared prosperity?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start with the concept of nothing about us without us. And so in this moment, in this conversation, and also I think in the context of project delivery, I'm not comfortable speaking certainly on behalf of First Nations. But what I do, what I do think is this is a really important opportunity that if the government gets it right, can be absolutely transformative to how we deliver infrastructure in the country. And I think fundamentally it starts with trust, and listening is fundamental to trust. And I think it's not just about sort of the duty to consult, but the opportunity to work sort of shoulder to shoulder with Indigenous communities to unlock, Indigenous approaches to land stewardship. You think about, for example, the Ring of Fire, which is a significantly important project. Indigenous communities throughout that region are the best able to speak to the land and sort of work alongside sort of more Western scientific approaches to land management and understanding. And I think that combination could be super powerful, but it means treating Indigenous communities, so sovereign nations, as equal partners and ensuring that they're at the table in the beginning. As I said in my sort of last, in answer to the last question, good projects rely on trust. It's like a marriage in sort of sickness and health. And there's sickness all through projects. Like there's always problems. And if you can work together in common purpose to solve them and leverage sort of the capacity and resources, around the table, sort of in common purpose, those are the ingredients for a successful project. So I think this moment is a time to sort of step back and say, what does that really look like as we're talking about working with First Nations, and how do we start this the right way? And it begins with listening and a true, equal party to equal party collaboration.
Thanks, Jen. Much appreciated. We have generated some questions from the audience. The first one is actually directed at you, Jen, but I think either of you could take it. So I'll offer it up to whoever wants to go first. Question from the viewer is, what do we think of the climate competitiveness strategy, which was, embedded in the budget?
Yeah, I think once again, I'm interested. I have lots of people in my orbit talking about the trees. I think, once again, the opportunity is to not think about climate as a vertical, but as a cross-cutting imperative. And in an infrastructure-focused budget and maybe historic investment in infrastructure, it needs to manifest in every single project. And so once again, I'm thinking less about the sort of what and more about the how. and how we're using climate as a lens in every infrastructure decision that we're making.
And I'm going to take the next question from the audience, which is shifting a little more onto the political side of what's happened. As I said off the top, if you were with us as we began this conversation, the politics in Ottawa have taken over, and really right now all eyes are on the numbers game in the Commons. We know that Mr. Carney is just a handful of seats short of majority since forming government in the spring. The question has been, won't he find the numbers in the House? Will he have to find a different dance partner on the opposition benches for every vote? Will there actually be some individuals who step forward and decide to vote with the government? If you've not been following closely, too long don't read. In fact, one member of the Conservative caucus has now left the Conservative caucus and is sitting with the government on the other side of the aisle. This is not unusual in parliamentary democracies, but in Canada, we don't have many examples of floor crossings to speak to. So it is, spectacular by Canadian political standards, I guess you can say. If you're a Canadian political nerd like I am, this is sometimes what we live for in terms of excitement. But coming down to the issue at hand, Kevin talked about the $1 billion question with respect to catalyzing private investment. The other $1 billion question here for anyone who's watching the politics is, can the government in fact pass this budget? We know the Conservatives are not going to vote with the government, and it seems that the Bloc Québécois, which actually, as a recognized party, holds the balance of power in the Commons, too, is not going to vote with the government here. So we get down to very small numbers, and it is a numbers game to ensure safe passage. The Liberals are safely 2 votes shy here of getting this budget through. And of course, a budget and the implementing measures surrounding a budget are by definition confidence measures, meaning that if the government cannot find confidence or test the confidence positively in the House of Commons, it is possible that we could find ourselves in an election scenario before Christmas. Before you get all nervous about that, I would say no one has a crystal ball, but I would say to you that in official Ottawa, nobody is revving up a campaign bus at the moment. The campaign was just this spring, and none of the major parties really want, nor are most of the recognized parties in really a fighting position to go into election mode right now. So something is going to have to give. So to answer the question, will this budget pass? I would say again, without the benefit of, I am not a mind reader. I don't know what is in the hearts and minds of every member of the Commons at the moment, but I think with some certainty you can predict that this budget will pass. Will that entail other floor crossings? That is possible. Is it also possible that some members of, for example, the New Democratic Party of Canada might abstain from voting, thereby allowing the budget to pass? There's a scenario that is possible. There are all kinds of horse trading options that may yet present themselves in the days to follow. But if you are concerned about the budget passing, you should be following carefully, but also maintain a steady dose of breath. Nobody should be over the top or panicking at the moment. I do think sanity will prevail in the Commons, and we will see Mr. Carney's first budget pass. Looking here, there is a question also on Indigenous rights and recognition, duty to consult under Section 35, but consent is also central to the implementation of several provisions of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, or UNDRIP. Further into this conversation we were having moments ago around Indigenous partnership in projects, I might turn it to you, Jen, just for any additional comments on obligations the federal government has with respect to its international obligations as a signatory to the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
Yeah, I think once again, I think the duty to consult and beyond that, related to UNDRIP, is is just the baseline. And I think what I'm seeing sort of as a theme throughout the budget and the sort of commentary around it is a desire to unlock innovation and collaboration. And so I think the opportunity is to go well beyond like what's the thing we're required to do, and instead see this as an enormous opportunity, not just to develop better projects, but to bring everybody together, and there are very unique skills and indigenous approaches to land stewardship, for example, back to the prior question around what about climate. Like we can learn an awful lot, and projects can be a lot better, and the outcomes of projects can be a lot more beneficial if we are once again not just meeting our duty, but working in partnership. And so I think it's a fundamental shift in how we value indigenous approaches to land stewardship in the context of infrastructure. So maybe I'll stop talking.
Thanks, Jen. Some very important comments. A number of questions have come in. I'm going to pick one of them, which I think is an important question for many in our audience. Let's talk about business opportunities out of this budget. What opportunities do we see here for businesses to engage with the government, more of an openness, perhaps a sense that the Trudeau government, while the Liberal government was maybe more closed to business, Mr. Carney and his cabinet perhaps more open to business. I won't get into the fact that many of the ministers are the same ministers, but are viewed as being more open now than they might have been previously. That aside, I won't editorialize anymore. Opportunities for businesses out of this budget. Kevin?
On the business opportunities, I think it's this whole budget, it seems to me, like you had to pick out like who are the winners. I think it's because it's growth focused. I think it is business. And in a slow growth environment, that hopefully that'll be taken by. Some of the comments I heard from some of the people, Mr. Goldie Hire and others, were kind of mixed. On the one hand, they appreciate this sort of shift towards this, the focus on growth and productivity. On the other hand, it was they're worried about the size of the deficit, and maybe they would have liked more help on taxes. And that's it. But I just think, with the significant injection of funds that is growth related, it's going to create enormous opportunities across the whole range of businesses. If I was starting out again, I think I would go to the construction side of the business. But again, there's other opportunities in there for research and innovation, that are exciting as well. But just so, if part of the pivot in terms of, for business opportunities, this is great. I think to be able to write off immediately expensing for some of those investments in the manufacturing industry. Some people say it's time limited, won't have which could limit its impact. But I think that, that's an enormous opportunity for businesses to really to pour money, into their, into capital, into machinery and equipment, and, to boost their productivity as well. A focus on growth hopefully creates more businesses, easier to invest. Hopefully that, we take advantage of those, the new credits. And again, this is one budget. We'll need to have a series of budgets. But I think it's very positive. I think business is the big winner on this budget.
Thanks, Kevin. Jen, same question. Opportunities for business in this budget, from where you're sitting.
Yeah. Once again, my sort of playground is infrastructure, and I think the execution, like how the funding is, how the budget investment is delivered in a way that actually incentivizes private investment, and creates investable project opportunities is what I'm paying most attention to.
The government has said leading up to this budget and since introducing it on the floor of the Commons on Tuesday that this is a bold budget. This is a transformational budget. This is a generational investment. I want to come back. We've had more audience members join us over the course of this conversation. Let's go back a little bit big picture here for a moment and really just answer this question. Is this the generational investment that Canada needed at this time? Has Mr. Carney and have Mr. Carney, Mr. Champagne, and the cabinet succeeded in meeting, not only just meeting this moment in history, but have they actually met their own rhetoric with what they've introduced to the Canadian people? I'll start with Kevin.
Yeah, I think it's, as we look, a day or two has passed since the budget. I think, we start to you think about it in a different way. Yeah, I think retrospectively now, the language around, generational investments, the high expectations, some of the numbers that are in newspapers today, $500 billion or $1 trillion of new investment. It's a high bar with respect to like raising expectations. Like, I don't think it's possible for in one budget, to make a one generational investment. I think it really, like, again, we're moving this, the budget in a different direction with this focus on growth. If you look at numbers, there's an additional $30 billion, close to 1 percentage point of GDP going into 2026, 27. That's a pretty big, hit. If we think of it in terms of, monies that were not there in the context of a very weak economy. Again, the overall outlays in cash or in terms of accrual investments over 5 years, it's significant. But I think there's just no way in one budget because there are constraints. I think there are limits to what people would find financially or socially acceptable with respect to the size of the deficit. The government has a constraint with respect to hitting an operational budget target in 2028-29. I think there's a limits with respect to the debt to GDP ratio. We're seeing some upward lift, but I don't think it would be possible to show a budget that had a significantly rising debt to GDP ratio while the economy is still showing even some modest growth. So I think like the government was constrained in order to on the size of investment. Within those constraints, it's done probably as much as it could have, and I think it's really played up the numbers, in terms of cash and what the multiplier effects could be. Back to Jen's point, could we be running into, given the multi-year nature of capital investment, could we have some, if the economy continues to peter over the next number of months, could we be running into some failed expectations? I think that is a political risk for the government.
The paradox of a budget that is both a budget that invests and that is restrained. Thank you, Kevin, for speaking to those the constraints and the parameters that the government had to operate within. Jen, did the budget meet the hype from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think once again, and I fear I'm a bit of a broken record. Like so like what amount would have met the hype? I think it's less about the number, and frankly, I think we need to make scarce public dollars operate much more efficiently than they have been. To me, the sort of opportunity to meet the headlines is how we deploy that capital, how we ensure it's multi-solving, how we unlock capacity and ingenuity, not just from the private sector, but also community impact sector. Like, this is a space with a lot of expertise and experience working with, private philanthropy and private investment alongside, for example, public assets, and also is able to leverage significant community trust. I think thinking about the how we are delivering projects is what will enable this investment to really be transformative for Canada.
Thanks, Jen. As we talked about, this budget was introduced in the context of a trade war, a very changed relationship with the United States, a very changed, perhaps forever, global trading system, an intent by the government here to demonstrate that Canada can be more sovereign, more effective on its own, diversification of trade corridors. We've seen the Prime Minister just about everywhere, globetrotting. He's on one continent, Minister of Trade is on another, Minister responsible for Canada-US effectively living in Washington, D.C. These are not usual times from what we have come to appreciate in a generation, post-war period up until now. We've been the beneficiaries of a safe and secure North America. The sand is shifting beneath our feet. Any final thoughts, just generally, on where we are as Canadians operating in this economy, not the budget specifically, but how you feel about where we are right now vis-a-vis all of the various issue sets that the government is contending with from a global perspective?
Well, I can start, Jen. I think I think like the budget is an opportunity to communicate, to Canadians and to the world that Canada is going to move in a different direction. I think when we see the Prime Minister, as you alluded to, on different continents, talking to global leaders, it's, I think it's, that in itself, talking about trade opportunities means like the shift is on and it's real. And I think it's fortuitous that we have a Prime Minister that has, that this kind of gravitas globally, that, from his world work as a central banker and his experience working for a large bank, and also a public servant. I think it's fortuitous as well that we have a clerk of the Privy Council, Mr. Sabia, who also has public service and acumen as well as a significant business acumen. I think so. Having them, on the front lines, this is important to open markets. I think they are trying to create excitement, that Canada is going to move in this different direction. But I think, as you also alluded to, Marci, that there are these dark clouds that the trade system globally is still a mess. Most of us, in the evenings are looking at what's happening to the Supreme Court. How are they going to rule with respect to the way President Trump has used tariffs, and I think really dark and put some dark clouds over the global trading environment. Could that get rolled back? So these clouds still affect the uncertainty. On the other hand, like putting significant resources into an economy where it is relatively weak creates enormous opportunity for that money to be used. So you got to create excitement domestically and internationally. And I think they're doing their best.
All right. Well, I'm hoping we're going to end on the excitement and a little bit of certainty, as Kevin just spoke to after getting through sort of the darker pieces that I laid out. But Jen, over to you. Where do we stand right now?
Yeah, I think actually picking up on Kevin's Blue Jays analogy from earlier in the conversation, it was amazing how many new baseball fans emerged, certainly in my social circle, and I think, this let's say pressure from the South, if it's done anything positive, it has created this sort of sense of national pride and a commitment to invest here. Unlikely partnerships. And there's, to me, a lot of opportunity in sort of us working together, like building social license, whether it's building social license for the change we need, driving innovation, in the, for example, public sector, to in governance to unlock private ingenuity and community sector ingenuity. Like it feels to me like having everybody kind of rowing in the same direction is a pretty significant opportunity, and I feel like this budget can help seed that if we deliver it in the right way. So the devil will be in the details of execution.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Kevin. Like Blue Jays fans from coast to coast to coast, I know we've all taken that pride really seriously over the last couple of weeks, and hope it does translate and continue to keep us going through these complicated moments that we're facing together, and hopefully actually inject us with excitement across the board in terms of how we contribute to our communities and our economy writ large. It has been my pleasure to moderate this panel, a little bit by accident this morning, but glad to be able to step in and do so. Jen Angel is the CEO of Evergreen. Kevin Page is the CEO of the Institute of Fiscal Studies and Democracy. My name is Marci Surkes. I am Managing Director and Chief Strategy Officer at Compass Rose Group. It has been a really thoughtful, insightful dissection of Federal Budget 2025. I want to thank the dozens and dozens of viewers we've had over the course of this conversation for making the time. I want to thank the team at Means and Ways, which is a publication right at the intersect of Canadian economics and Canadian politics. I think we've successfully, I hope, Means and Ways team hit on the two sides of your mandate this morning. There is still a lot to watch if you are interested in the budget. There will be, as I said, there will be some confidence votes coming at us in the next couple of days. We will really have a sense of where things are going in the Commons. It's going to keep being exciting, I think, as we move toward the Christmas holidays. So stay tuned for more. Appreciate everyone's time. Thank you to the audience, and we'll see you again at the next webinar.